Yeah, do we need to let them know, should I tell them that Tony might check in?
Is it pretty?
Yeah, because they'll
or-
probably be out of network.
Of course, we're down in numbers too, so you
Yeah.
had higher numbers when you're there, so everything's low
Good
relative.
afternoon and welcome to
Yes,
our
correct.
community session to just share with you lots of details about school funding and the MPSD. So we're excited to share some information for you just to get a greater idea of how schools are funded. School funding is so vastly different from how many businesses are funded. So just wanted to provide a little bit of an insight in regards to how schools are funded. And I have Mary Blaha from Baird Financial with us, and she is. We work with Baird not only on looking at potential debt issuances, just financial planning. We have some tools that we'll share and kind of show you live that we use to kind of look at some of the many factors that put the big picture together. So thank you, Mary, for joining us today. Okay, so again, we're going to provide an overview of revenue limit, equalized value, and mill rates, and then aid for school districts. And there will be time for questions and then also for you to provide feedback at the end as well. So first with revenue limits. So revenue limits are our largest source of revenue. So they make up over 80% of our funding that we have for the school district. So that's why they are so important. We talk about revenue limits all the time. So the main portions of the revenue limit and how it's calculated, it's the maximum amount of revenue that we can raise through both state aid and general property tax levy. So there's two main pieces that go to that. So in a nutshell, you could picture a balloon or a glass of water. I'll use a glass of water example. So a glass of water would represent your full revenue limit authority. And whatever is not filled up with aid, you can levy out to your tax base through revenue limits. So it's driven primarily by the district's full-time equivalent enrollment and the district's maximum revenue per member. So those two things are the main primary drivers. So what does that mean for Manitowoc Public School District? So right now our resident, and these are 23-24 budget numbers, so some of this isn't really finalized for this year's revenue limit. So we're just gonna go on last year's numbers to kind of help illustrate this. So our resident FTE is 4857 currently, and then our amount per pupil rose up to 11,000. Then there are two other groups of exemptions. There are one-time non-recurring exemptions, so they're not really guaranteed, and then recurring exemptions, which are guaranteed. So like we have an operational referendum. Ours is a non-recurring operational referendum. So what's important about that is that it is not guaranteed forever. Some districts will have recurring referendums, but they pass with less success at times. But then the other challenging part about a recurring referendum is it's based on your FTE count. So as your enrollment declines, so would that funding as well. So that's a larger discussion, but we'll just keep it brief with that. So all of those factors together bring together your full total revenue limit authority. And so, as I turn over to Mary, where do we stack in there with all of the other, compared to other districts?
Right, so you see where it says $11,000 per pupil. So Manitowoc Public School District is at the low revenue ceiling of $11,000 per pupil. And the state average actually is $11,606. So Manitowoc is $606 per pupil less than the state average. There are a lot of districts that are at that low revenue ceiling, that $11,000. So Manitowoc is not alone. However, just when you look at that state average, $606 times that 4,800 is a pretty significant amount.
So that's where there is still some inequities within school funding for sure, and it's a challenge because there's always winners and losers in the school revenue limit authority or school revenue limit calculation, especially when it comes to per pupil. So looking ahead in some of these things, I have links to our revenue limit worksheet at the end of the presentation, and we have it in the live stream, and we'll put it out on the Facebook page and stuff too, so you can look at some of the links a little closer in this presentation. But the revenue limit looks sort of like this on the front half. There's two main pages of it. And what I wanted to point out here is that, you know, we'll talk about pupil counts and stuff, and then that all comes into this section of the revenue limit worksheet. And interestingly enough, summer school, you'll see this come back in the aid worksheet, but summer school is an important part of our aid as well as our regular September student count that we have for the school district. So as Mary had mentioned, the low revenue ceiling went up $1,000. It was $10,000 probably, I'm trying to think, so just maybe for 4 or 5 years before, correct? Mm-hmm. And as I was just talking before the session started, one thing to think about is just for per pupil revenue. During the pandemic, the state of Wisconsin did not give us additional funding per student. They said, you have your federal dollars, use your federal dollars. And so, you know, that stayed frozen. And so and then at the same time, we received more state aid. And so that kind of created a perfect storm in a lot of ways, but, and we'll come back to that later, but we received additional $1,000 per pupil last year, which was huge. And then it was also passed that we'd receive $325 additional per year. Well, for forever at the time is what it was passed at. That may change. So we're heading into the second year of the biennium budget, and we'll see if that is maintained. When we plan as a district, we have to think in terms of that funding may exist for the long haul, and it may change. So we have to kind of keep it all in mind. So we talked a little bit about non-recurring and recurring exemptions. So we just wanted to talk briefly about what went into those two areas. So our base revenue is $11,000 per student, and we'll get another additional $325 and $24.25. And just a really, really common point of confusion is that when we have, you know, more revenue per pupil, it does not necessarily mean that we have more money from the state. It simply means that there's more overall funds available for the full revenue limit authority. So anytime something is involved with the revenue limit, it's going to be, you know, kind of managed in with the balance of state aid and the local tax levy. So if they say you can levy or you have more in your revenue limit, that means you also, depending upon where your aid is, it means that your levy could be more as well, or you have more authority.
And then it also, though, if you think about the importance of the revenue limit, that first chart that you saw where it was like 80% of the revenues are coming from that revenue limit formula, and that is determining then 80% of the district's revenues. And if the district is trying to have a balanced budget with the revenues and expenditures matching, then 80% of that is coming from that formula that's derived by the state.
Very true. And there's two other pieces, prior year carryover, and we have not used that approach with our revenue limit in our budget in Manitowoc, and then transfer of service. Transfer of service is simply if we get a student, for example, from another school district and has extensive needs, we can do a transfer of service and say that, you know, because we took on this group of students or this student, we need to expand our services and hire more staffing, and that utilizes or provides the ability for us to do that through transfer of service. So this is just a little snapshot of how the recurring exemptions are just on the very top of the revenue limit worksheet. You'll see on the very top section of the yellow, there's the per pupil amounts. And then, you know, right now we don't have any special recurring exemptions, so just the per pupil is in that section. The one-time non-recurring exemptions, those are our operational referendum. That's the largest portion for us right now, and that's huge. There's also a declining enrollment hold harmless. So what that means is there's, on the first page of the revenue limit worksheet, there's a part that goes over a base average and a current average. And what they essentially do is say, you know, as your enrollment declines right now, and this is going on all over the state, they give us additional funding per pupil, in order to smooth out the funding loss as the enrollment declines. So you don't all of a sudden lose all of your funding or have a major dip. And so a district can kind of plan ahead and do the best it can to smooth out those changes as enrollment declines. The other piece is the money for the school choice vouchers. They're paid through the government, so it's just something that they're routed through the revenue limit formula because the state is not able to get money for private schools just by going through the private schools. They have to funnel it through the public school system. So I had learned once and heard from someone that it was because of how the Constitution was formatted or worded for the state, but that's how they had to route that. So that's one interesting tidbit that I had learned. And the vouchers have a net zero impact on our budget. We receive more revenue limit authority because we have the obligation to pay for the vouchers. So we have to expense it in our budget and we receive the additional authority through the revenue limit. So, but because it has a net zero impact on the budget, what it does have an impact on is the tax levy. So that's a huge thing to keep in mind. And when you see the non-recurring exemptions, this is just kind of the slice of the pie. It'll talk about that. Last year, we had $3.8 million that were funded through government and state-funded vouchers. So this is just this is really hard to read here, I understand that, but if you see there's a bottom line and a top line, and you can see that there's quite a spread. So the bottom line shows where our revenue limit funding is with the per pupil revenue, and that kind of covers over time. It projects ahead and shows where our revenue is going to be with declining enrollment. The top lines show both just show it with the non-recurring exemptions with the operational referendum funds. So when we had the operational referendum out for vote, we did not understand and know at the time, because of how the state budget cycle is, that we would receive $325 more per pupil. So I have there's a green line on top that shows with, if we keep getting all that same additional funding per pupil, and then the bottom is based what we did on the referendum. So overall, we need to, because of our declining enrollment, we need to mind that gap too as we set our budget and plan ahead. You can see that we weren't quite, we've been dependent upon operational funds for quite a while, and our reliance, especially due to inflation, has grown. And so we just have to kind of keep that whole picture in mind as we plan ahead on that.
So Manitowoc has an operational referendum, and as you can see on the map here, majority of school districts in the state of Wisconsin have asked at least an operational referendum question since 1992. Every election cycle, so coming up, so today is an election day, and in November, there is going to be another election day. And at Baird, quite often we're looking at this saying, okay, which of those white districts do we see there that are going to be colored in? So districts have until August 27th to decide if they're going to go to a referendum for November. So after August 27th, we'll be going in there and coloring in if there are any new districts that have never asked for an operational referendum before. But you can see that there are only 64 of those districts left.
And then kind of shifting a little bit back to vouchers, and we're going to go to the Baird model in a second here. But just if you look here between 2009-10, where there was one district that had the voucher program impact, 22-23, there was 82% of districts. So that was, it's really just multiplied in the state. And I have to mention too, some of these, you'll see WASBO at the bottom of these slides is very informative slideshow that we had just talking about the state of vouchers, or just the state of school finance in general. So what I want to show you here is real quickly, and this is our tool, And in one of the, just to kind of see it in play. And this is, I'll go back here. So in this, we have right now, there's quite a bit of funding that goes, and I'll zoom in here, for vouchers, and then people, it increased with the last budget. So with this new budget cycle, if you'll see right here, used to be $9,800 per student per pupil that they would receive. And now it is increased to $12,300 or $731, and then $15,000. And that is for like the 9, 12, K-8, those are the amounts. So if you think of it too, our students, we get $11,000 per student in our revenue limit, and we are paying out more per student in the voucher program. So one of the things that's a common misconception, and vouchers are something to take note of, but there is a positive side for the district because we are aided in the voucher program. So that is what I wanted to show in here. So what we're thinking of for next year and what I'm planning just preliminarily is $4.3 million in vouchers. If we were to take that out of here, and then I'm able to go here to the equalization aid, I'll zoom in on this. We would lose approximately $4.3 million in the next year in aid. So we have about, and that is a pretty close number there. It's not, it's a little bit additional that we get. It's been between $100,000 and $200,000 more that we get in aid compared to what we pay out. So we would lose if the vouchers would be out of the revenue limit calculation, that would be something that we could have more of a negative effect and, with a little bit of a loss on that.
So vouchers are part of that non-recurring section that we have looked at. And so if there was not 4.3 million of non-recurring referendum for the vouchers, the allowable revenue limit would go down. There's an exact same expense, so that would just go away. But what's happening is because the state allows you to count those voucher students, and I think we can see that at the top. We can count those voucher students in the equalization aid calculation. So that gives Manitowoc Public Schools more equalized aid, which helps to lower the tax levy. So it's like good news, bad news, because the tax levy would go down 4.3 million, but at the same time, the district would be losing state aid, which is used to offset the local property tax levy.
And just on the levy impact, here we have $5.94 with those vouchers out. If we were to go back and put those back in,
and while she's doing that, if you're wondering where those voucher dollar amounts come from, that is part of the state budget process. That's where that's determined.
thank you. And so we had $5.94 before. Here it's $7.05 with those same estimated vouchers in. So these are estimates for this year. That's just where, so that's a pretty substantial. It's over $1 impact in the tax levy that goes directly to the vouchers. So. Okay. So equalization aid. So your full revenue limit authority. And then what you need to do is you need to go and look at the equalization aid after. That's the next part, the big main piece that drives us eventually to what we have is our amount that we have available to levy to the public. So why is the aid important? It is, it offsets our tax levy. That's the main piece that we are our main primary funding from the state. It identifies the less state general aid, it equals the the levy overall, so. And we were talking beforehand about the average
So
funding.
so the state average, we can see here, so for Manitowoc, the state, or the amount of state aid, it's a combination of general aid and some computer and personal property aid, but those dollar amounts are so small that we just usually say state aid.
Yeah.
And the state aid for Manitowoc is 57.8%. The state average is only 47.04%. So Manitowoc Public Schools is receiving more state aid than the average to offset that revenue limit authority.
And so just talking about the primary factors, so our equalized land values, so that some of those things are just coming out now, our estimates that we can use for that. And then our shared costs, so they take like your eligible costs and then they take your counts that are eligible for the aid calculation, and then that becomes your shared cost per member. Part of what goes into that is your third Friday and second Friday, or your third Friday in September and your second Friday in January counts. So we do the counts 2 times a year. The count is then on the same date across the state so that, you know, everyone's counting at the same time. So it's a big deal, and it's a main primary sort of stamp in time. So then what they do is that per pupil basis is converted into a formula, and we get a valuation per member. And so that helps you find, you know, the more students that you can have counted in that, the lower the amount per member, and that helps you receive more state aid. So it's tricky to think of how it averages out all on the whole. So this is hard to read in general, but we have 5,173 students that are used in our aid calculation. In our equalized value, $3.8 million is used in that. So that's the amounts that we're kind of on standby to kind of see for our aid and see where that will come in for this next year. And we're positively aided as a school district. So what that means is that it's advantageous for us to maximize our aid and spend down our budget as much as we are able. And because the more it just allows us to maximize the aid that we can receive.
So when you're spending down your budget, you're spending what you had budgeted, and that's part of the shared cost calculation in the equalization aid formula. So basically by spending more because of the way Manitowoc is situated in the aid calculation, then you receive additional aid. And then additional aid does not mean, I'm probably going to be jumping out of line here, but additional aid does not mean that there's more money for the district to spend. Equalization aid is important for, it's a property tax levy relief is what it is. But the district spends time looking at how can we get as much aid as we can because we want to lower the property tax levy.
Mm-hmm. And that's when, during pandemic times, too, the state gave additional aid, and people thought that we were getting more money, but we weren't getting more money per pupil at that time. It was just property tax relief. So this is, you know, some of the aid factors we do get in the aid for it's called the statewide choice, or seeing pupils. That's where it's what it's labeled on there. And then the statewide special needs scholarship program, that's for, you know, we have students that qualify for that as well. And that's where it comes into the aid calculation. And so just a little snippet on the revenue limit worksheet, you'll see the aid comes in at that point, and we wait till October 15th. You can see the link on there. So October 15th of every year is kind of like I don't want to say it's like Christmas because sometimes it's scary, but it's kind of like everyone waits for October 15th to know your count. So it's like a business manager or a holiday or a nightmare. I'm not sure which, it depends. So just aids and vouchers. Actually, I kind of jumped ahead and did this a little bit too. So the vouchers on aid, what happens if the vouchers are eliminated? So we looked at that a little bit already. So, and then we talked a little bit, just because we get more aid, it doesn't mean we have more to spend, it's just more aid within the calculation and the balance with the levy. So maximizing equalization aid is always our goal. So what can we do, to maximize the aid spend on our budget? We also are fortunate to have a Fund 46 in our district where it allows us to make a transfer. Just last week, we had our audit as a district. And so, we're working after July 1 to close down the rest of the budget. And we have the ability to make a fund and date it back to June 30th and count it on the previous year if we make the transfer by July 30th. And that helps us take any estimated unspent funds and put them in a special trust fund that can only be used on capital improvements projects. And then we're able to get aided on that, and that's huge. So that, we're able to maximize our aid. And I don't have those numbers here, but Mary and I were talking about this presentation, and we were able to make a transfer of 2.5 million this year just because of a couple of factors. And we estimated that would give us about $830,000 more in aid this year. So that definitely, it has a positive impact to be about 20 cents on the mill rate. So local tax levy. So, there are a lot of different factors that go into the tax levy. Our school district property taxes, include the revenue limits for funds 10, 38, and 41. And then some districts also have referendum approved debt in Fund 39 and community services levy Fund 80 as possible other funds that they can levy funds from. So we just have the one levy. If you look at the graph on the right, that's what we currently have. So when you're calculating the mill rate, you have your total tax levy, and it's divided by your equalized property value times 1,000, and that gives you your mill rate or tax rate. So we've called it that interchangeably from time to time. So our total school levy last year was $25 million, and our equalized property value was $3.7 billion. So that brought us to $6.65 overall.
And compared to the state average was $7.22 per thousand for K-12 districts. So Manitowoc's mill rate is below the state average.
And I think we're middle of the road for the county. So we used to be the lowest, but we're middle of the road right now. And in that big revenue limit worksheet, which you'll have a link to at the bottom, is kind of where all the levy information comes into play. And you can see, I would say most districts have more than one levy. We're kind of, unique in a way that we have just the one primary levy, but it all depends. So we do not have a community service levy here, but that's because we have our rec department is run through our city. So that's one of the main reasons that we don't have that. And we're debt free at this time. So if we would add, in the revenue limit worksheet, looking at, let's see if I can pull it up here real quick. If we would add, see if I can show you quickly here. So if we were, I'll just add, I'll put a $2 million payment here and a $200,000 for community services. So what that does when you would have your right here. Oh, okay. So if we were to have,
Just change that on the upper right-hand corner.
should I do on the details or?
I was just, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's on there. Yep.
Okay, just change it to 25, because that's where you put that in. Yeah, so you see.
Ah, yes, that's right. Thank you. So in here, you can see here when you, if you were to add some, if we had, let's say we had a debt payment that we took on someday for capital projects or something, that would all come into the full calculation. So the main thing to know is like with these additional levies, it goes on top of your mill rate. So our mill rate is $6.65 right now. And if you would add that on, you would end up, you would have just a bigger, your tax payment goes up as a result of that. So usually those levies are smaller and have a much more minimal impact on the total tax levy overall. So if you have 27 million is that, I'll back up and take those numbers out real quick. And I'll come back to this, but so now that's 30 right there.
So that is the 24-25 projected, Angela, so.
Yes, that's
you
not
can
fine.
reconcile why it's different from the 23-24 that we're looking at later.
So that takes that out of there. So it just has an impact overall. I didn't, bring it down to the actual mill rate impact. So, but that would just add onto the levy itself when you add those levies into the mix. So. Okay. So we take a lot of time to look at multiple, different scenarios, and I prepare them for the board at times based on, some factors that I think we need to think ahead to. This is just a snippet. I just put a picture in there so you could see how that looks. We have to update things in there like our enrollment projections. Also in this model, we can look at what we estimate the number of classes that we need, number of teachers at grade levels and stuff. And especially as we are really having more conversations about declining enrollment, we can think about that kind of stuff and look at that within the model. So things to watch and listen for, we have declining enrollments, as we've mentioned several times. Funding has not maintained, or per pupil funding has not maintained the pace with inflation. I have a slide coming up to do with that. The rising cost of the vouchers that's passed on to the taxpayers through our revenue limit, it's costly. So it's estimated about $500,000 more. So, comes in with the aid, and it appears in many different areas, but it does impact the picture. So we have to just think ongoing about our need for an operational referendum. It is very, very important that we have that funding because it's critical for us to offer an outstanding education for our students to be competitive in the job markets. It's really, really hard to, get staff all over the state. Many districts are struggling to fill the seats. And so we include that in our projections and work very strategically to try to be a destination district. So, and we're not alone in many of these challenges. So our declining enrollment, this is just a little slide that shows statewide the trends in declining enrollment. Really plummeted during the pandemic. And there were a lot of changes too with delivery of instruction during that time. And then this is the one that talks really, we're really $3,380 behind per pupil if they would have kept pace with inflation from 2008-9. It's really, that gap continues to grow, and that is a huge factor for districts. And so just the general timeline, we received our estimate of aid. So we have that in our hands now. So we, are planning ahead with that. Our equalized value estimates are well, they're kind of like finalized July 31st, and we haven't received it yet, but I believe what I'm hearing is around 8% for what was released for by the state and county. Have had some press releases regarding that. So the main events that are coming up for us to finalize sort of the calculations of the things that go into that revenue limit are the third Friday in September count. Then that equalized value is finalized October 1. So then we just have an estimate July 31st, then we get the final. Then on the 15th of October, we get just like our aid is finalized and our voucher amounts are released. And then we but we have all of the budget kind of all set to go. Then we finalize the levy late in October. And that's when the levy is set by the board. So in the packet, and I can make sure that this gets out on Facebook as well, I put a bunch of links in here for DPI web pages and our revenue limit worksheet that I referenced in this presentation and our estimate of aid. There's a lot of longitudinal data. If you really like Excel spreadsheets and stuff, you can really, really have a lot of fun. If you're bored at home on a Saturday night and you want to pull it up, you can, switch it over to Manitowoc. It's kind of neat. You download these spreadsheets and you change the district and you can look at all the different factors and stuff. And it's kind of fun. When I applied for the job here, I'm like, let's look at their revenue limit worksheet. What would I be walking into here? And that's one of the first things I looked at. So, and I live in the community. I have kids that attend school and I graduated from Lincoln. So this is all, this is my work, but I'm very part of my personal life as well. But DPI has a lot of resources here that if you like that kind of stuff, you can look into it more. And then, we'll take questions, but I did put my contact information in here. Please feel free to contact me anytime. And then if you want to, I would love your feedback. If you can do this, we have a SurveyMonkey link there. If you want to scan that, tell me, if there's, just any feedback you have on that, that will be very, very helpful. So the rest of the time I wanted to save for questions.
I have a couple.
Yeah, go ahead.
My first one is, I think back some time ago, there's a misconception going out there. I think it's a misconception, but I'm not really sure. Is the referendum money that we voted on in the last election, is that matched by the state?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. And then my second question is, and I think this goes along with what you were talking about as far as budget, but I think it's an important thing for people to hear, and I think Keith pointed it out at the last meeting. If we borrow the $20 million or whatever it is we can borrow, the approximate payment on that is $1 million a year.
Correct.
So if we, by the time you take out the voucher system, you're left with a balance, right? Basically, one way to look at it. You have to account for that $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 or whatever it is. That money has to come from somewhere.
Correct. And I think the larger thing that we need to understand as a district that with their declining enrollment, our expenditures in theory, I mean, the cost of everything continues to rise, but our amount per pupil, our price that we budget should, or the amount that we budget should stay stable in a sense.
So if I look back over a 30-year history with the Manitowoc Public Schools, so I graduated in '91. I have a daughter who's a junior in high school, but I've had 2 children since then graduate. We've lost German, we've lost Japanese, we've lost the IB program, we've lost quite a few, I think, AP programs. There's no more accelerated opportunities, there's no more gifted and talented programs. So it seems like we're taking and reshuffling the money into other things, but the students on the other end of the spectrum aren't getting resources. So when we talk about budgets, we talk about things like SFA, which was $2.6 million its first year and anticipated to be what this year was at $400,000 for just this year, when we could have, purchased a reading program for $600,000 that would have been for, 5 years altogether for $600,000. That's a lot of money that is sacrificed from other things. We're talking about loss of theater, loss of foreign language, loss of arts, loss of performing arts, big impact things that benefit all students. How does that all fit into our budget?
Well, hey, it's all a huge challenge because we have to look at, there's many, we have the interests of the instructional portion and you talk about the needs of just the infrastructure of the district too, that has to be weighed. Many different aspects to all of that are, it's not just one thing. So, when you look at, we have to look at our amount per pupil and just overall for what we bring in through for all revenues, the total budget. And we have to make a lot of important choices, yeah.
I mean, it's a tough one. When my son was
Yeah.
in 6th grade, he took courses at Northwestern University as part of the accelerator program. It's gone. Gone. And it's tragic because kids are being affected in lots of different ways. And those supplemental programs are just as important as reading, writing, and math. They are.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, it's not a
No,
direct answer. I
No,
think that
but-
it's a lot of, there's always competing interests and growing needs. I think especially the largest challenge that we talk about in when we have our executive team meetings and just ongoing discussions, coming out of the pandemic, there were a whole change in the whole landscape has changed because what was, what the conversations were before then, what they are now were totally different, but we still have the same charge to get students ready to be part of the community and thrive in our world.
So Angela, oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, yeah, just help me understand this. So the state of Wisconsin provides more money to kids from rich districts for their education than it provides for poor districts,
Well,
right? So all the children are not equal in Wisconsin, right?
well, what they try to do through through equalization aid is they work to, and they try to look at districts and make everyone on an equal playing field. So
Oh, they do.
if you have, if you have a district that is a huge resort community, okay? So like if you have like an Elkhart Lake, they're gonna receive far less state aid because they can receive more through their local property
I see,
taxes.
okay.
Or
Okay.
like some, I don't know, just say like Door County district.
Door counties are real.
Yeah, Mary would maybe
Yeah.
have some in her back pocket here, but,
Yeah, there are several districts like that, or even districts up north where their property values are so much higher per pupil. So that's why when I said that the state average is 47% and Manitowoc is gets way more than that, it's looking at that property value per
Okay.
pupil. So that's how the state's trying to equalize that.
Okay.
However, that doesn't give you more to spend. It's that revenue limit authority where Manitowoc was at $11,000, which is lower than the state average. So that all came into play. That started back in 1993-94 when revenue limits were put into place. And so the state has tried to give districts like Manitowoc by doing that, raising that $1,000 from $10,000 to $11,000, trying to get districts to catch up to that because you started behind. However, you're still behind the state
Yeah,
average
okay.
even with that.
Okay, yeah, okay, that helps.
Going back to your one-time non-reoccurring exemptions,
Yes.
declining enrollment, hold harmless is an exemption that we get because our district, because we are on declining enrollment. So that's money that comes back to us. But we don't get that every year, right? You only get, it's a one-time. When do we declare that? How far do we sink before we get that reimbursement?
what they do is they take your base average enrollment and your current, and they,
Right.
and they basically subtract that from your base to your current, and then give you the per pupil amount based on your difference. So
We only
like,
get that once.
well, you get it, yeah, every year, but it's recalculated every year.
Okay,
So, yes, so,
okay. But it is recalculated every year. So our population is recalculated every year for that agreement.
yes, and I want to say when I was going back and putting together that one chart that was really small, but like our hold harmless used to be like only, I want to say, now it's like $600,000 we get, but it used to be well under $100,000, like $60,000 a year. So we are getting hold harmless every single year because of the declining enrollment. So.
But what I like to think about on that non-recurring side, think about that is like that number turns to zero at the end of the school year, and then it's new numbers that show up there. So that's, so like you said, it's one time, it only happens once, you get that hold harmless. Just happens that Manitowoc Public School fits the criteria again to get it,
Every year.
but it does, yeah.
Is that on the third Friday or is that the January count? When does that,
September.
will the September third Friday count?
Yeah, correct. It could be that we have, like, I think it was a 48, but let's say it's 4,800 students is the amount that you have in your base average, and then you go up to 48,000 or 4,800 one, you know, you could go up one student, then you would have no difference, you wouldn't get the hold harmless.
Or you
As
wouldn't?
long as you, if your current average goes up compared to your base average, so.
After that count?
Yes, after that count. So that's where that, like Mary said, it wipes out every year and then they reconsider it every year if you get it. But we're in the spot where we're gonna likely keep continuing to receive that.
Are we still one of the considered a low spending district, and we're still meeting that criteria in the state as a low spending district?
Yes. So they also would use your prior year expenditures, but because everyone went up to 11,000, what they did is like everyone went up to there, and if you could either get that, and if you were over 11,000, then you could get the 325. So really, the gap still continued. So it's not like they held everyone at their rates if they were above 11,000 and brought only the low spending districts up. Everyone went up.
Well, everyone went up.
So that kind of continues. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Did I see somewhere that we were not taxing up to our full potential then?
Correct. The general default is generally a district will work to levy to the max. That's the term. Okay. The reason we did not levy to the max is because we passed the operational referendum. This is a really good question. But because our levy was going up as much as it was going up went up 37%. We had that big major dip.
Yeah.
And so if we would have levied to the max, I don't know it would have been around 50% increase and so we also kind of confusing it a little bit, but remember I said before that when we passed the operational referendum, we did not know we were going to get the additional per pupil. So that's where we had to step back and say, okay, we have more money, we have more revenue limit authority than we estimated we would have. We only need to take what we need. So that's where we can reevaluate that every year, like if we truly need to revenue our levy up to the max. So trying to control it a little bit, yes.
Okay, well, it's been in the paper that an elementary school is basically closing, and this facility is also closing. What's gonna happen to the real estate? Is it gonna be sold? How does that affect the budget? What's the timeline to make a decision and all these other fun things?
The board has made no decisions regarding closing schools at this time. So that's, those conversations about how to manage our declining enrollment will continue to have. Regarding this facility, we have to first look into a lot of pieces about where we have a lot of factors to investigate, and so it's not going to happen tomorrow. Over the next
6 months,
couple of
12
6 months, we'll determine what the next steps are, if it's feasible within, if we even have the space to move. We have vacant classrooms here and there, but we rent a classroom two classrooms at UW Manitowoc Center. So it's, we've got to look at all of our space and see if it's possible.
Well, my question is, if we're closing facilities, are they going up for sale, and how would that affect the budget? Or because, in my budget, in my house,
Yes.
I can't hang on to a piece of real estate I'm not using.
And we would as a district, so like when we vacated McKinley building, so I'm only gonna speak to what we've done in the past, because I don't know that I don't have the magic crystal ball for what's going on in the next year, so that's beyond my I help with this stuff, but when we had McKinley building and we vacated that, when we did the grade realignment, the district did sell that as quickly as we were able to, so when we weren't utilizing.
That building's had empty for quite a while.
Yes.
7 years.
Yes, and then it was used during the pandemic as well, but then it's, we did get it sold, and it took a little while to sell it, so. But we would, the district, it's in policy that we are to work to get rid of any property that we have that we're not utilizing, and then that's a one-time revenue. And so that, of course, can be applied to, we can bring it in, it would, be reported in the year it's received, and then, utilize how we're able to make it. Put to use.
Another thing is, we've all heard the term Katrina babies, about all the babies that were born after Katrina. I'm assuming there's gonna be some COVID babies coming into the school system in short order.
Yeah, yes. And I wouldn't, I think definitely, often when there is even just natural disasters in general, so the first superintendent they worked with, talked about when they had like a tornado in their community, they noticed when just an influx of needs.
My question is those kids are 2 years away from hitting the school system now.
Yeah, and they're probably.
So that's gonna take your declining enrollment and could actually turn the tide. You could get an influx.
From that perspective, we have not seen data around that we would, have increasing enrollment. We're, looking at the sizes of when we look at the sizes of our graduating, our high school classes, they are significantly larger than the amounts. We used to get in the 300s for our 4K, and now we're in the higher 200s for our 4K classes. I'm sorry,
But they're gonna hit the school system in the next year or two.
Yes, they would be, and so, I think, well, my goal
Angela.
is that the increase in just supports and needs that we've had from the students through the effects of the pandemic. So I know you were talking about a different thing a little bit, but our classes are getting smaller and smaller, and just our community is aging for management.
Angela.
Oh, yes.
Actually, just to address what he was asking, from what I've heard and the estimates that I've heard, it's gonna go the opposite direction. With COVID, it's gonna be an extreme decline in students, just with the social distancing and everything else that was going on. We've had, local hospital here, they got rid of maternity wards because there's just that many less babies being born around that time. So instead of, you would think it maybe because we were all locked in the house together, that's not what we were doing, so, you know what I mean?
No.
Right. No, I hear you. I'm saying as a whole. No, but you know what I mean? So they're estimating that it's gonna be extreme decline, which is gonna hurt us even more.
Katie, do you mind if I don't mean to call you on the spot here, but do you want to speak at all to what your teams have noticed?
Yeah, I think, we've had a lot of these conversations at our committee meetings where we've needed to add personnel. So to Angela's point earlier, the needs of our students are significantly different, especially at those very young, early developmental years. So we're seeing a huge influx by, 118% increase in students statewide with speech and language disorders, language and communication disorders as a result, many believe, of social distancing and long-term effects of the pandemic. Seeing a lot more, need for school-based mental health services and things. We're seeing a lot more just academic delays and social emotional delays. So there's definitely been a need to shift programming to support early intervention and to support early academic delays, social emotional delays, and those kinds of things. So it's been very different. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think too, when I was on Valders when the pandemic started, and just like when I came to Manitowoc, we had extensive, out there and here, just extensive open enrollment fluxes. And so that, we really have a net negative open enrollment, and what that means is that was part of the pandemic. We had a lot more students that open enrolled out at that time because we were doing virtual instruction. And a lot of students came back, but I think the other thing for Manitowoc is that once students leave, sometimes it's harder for them to come back. So I think my daughter was in kindergarten when I arrived in the district here, and she's in 4th grade, she's going into 4th grade. So, we have through, that whole group of students needs to move through the schools, but to recover. It's not something that happens on a one-year turnaround, and we just have to work as a district to try to reverse that trend. So. Good questions. Yes.
So I'm looking at the slide that says we're getting $3,380 less per pupil since 2009 per inflation.
Yes.
So if I took that times our 5,100 number roughly, I get like $17 million less in tax authority, right? So 80% of that would have been state aid.
If you would take our balance that we have right now, it'd be the per pupil, it would be the overall per pupil funding. If we were truly to have received everything, that we would have kept up with inflation, but that just is your total revenue limits.
So I guess what I'm trying to ask is that loss in funding is now being shifted onto us, the local taxpayer.
It doesn't, it's less revenue for the district as a whole. So really that aid and the levy balance is based on other factors, not how much we receive per pupil. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But costs have gone up because of inflation, but the funding hasn't.
Correct. And just that this, if you think too of like the $17 million, so we have asked taxpayers through the operational referendums for that additional money to try to make up. And the cost, the impacts of inflation, our cost of goods and everything that we have to purchase don't stay the same. And just to stay competitive with, even the CPI that we have to, get to meet when we do our increases for staff, and when we make those considerations, that was up to 8% one year, then down to 4.12 this year, 4.5 last year. So that has been a roller coaster that I think wasn't, the 10, 20 years before that, it was 1-2%. So.
So in 2009, most of that, or some of that, was provided by state funding.
Yes, in a way. It used to be provided through the state when they were meeting it, through the
Right.
revenue limit. But
In 2009.
And the revenue limit itself, a lot of people will say the revenue limit is broken as a funding mechanism, but a lot of people, I talked to Ken Mishler, our former business manager, he said it just wasn't funded. That's the main problem. You have to put the funding into it to make the calculations do what they're supposed to, and just continue to support that over time. So
It's just kind of shifted towards us.
Yeah, well, it doesn't really shift the cost from a standpoint of, you always are going to have the revenue limit calculation, no matter how much revenue you're bringing in, the calculation of what state aid and what is the levy. So, it just, overall, we're hurting because we don't have the additional revenue for people. So I'm not sure if I'm getting your.
No, I get it.
Or if you, anything, other thoughts to add to that, or that could be missing?
The revenue limit authority is the authority that the amount of revenue that the district can raise, which determines basically that deficit, if you have it between your revenues and expenses. So then the district projected a deficit and said we need to have a non-recurring operating referendum. The equalized aid is the other part of that, and the state is giving equalized aid to help to offset that. So when you see that amount of the blue line, the bottom line that's going up, at the same time, what the state has done is put more money into the aid pot to hopefully reduce the impact on property tax figures. But equalized aid is not money for the district to spend. The revenue limit authority is what the district receives for spending.
It's like we needed if you think of that cup, again, I talked about as an analogy, your revenue limit is your full cup, and then it's made up of your state aid and your levy. So, or another analogy would be the balloon. So like some districts receive, if you squeeze the balloon lower and you have bigger part at the top, some districts have more aid and then less levy. Some get less aid and have to levy more to their tax base, depending upon where they sit within the aid calculation.
I just wanted to say that I graduated from Lincoln in 1974. We had 677 students graduate. And all the people that were eligible to graduate didn't graduate, so I would think it would probably be more toward the 1,000. So when you say 300, you gotta think historically what happened to the community
Yes.
and to look at everything that did happen. And it can't stay the same. You have to
Right.
evolve with the changing times.
Yes, and a lot of, going back historically, they didn't, years before the revenue limits, a lot of people felt that they were, when there were larger counts and larger populations in the schools, yet there wasn't a cap on revenues, and there was concern just because some people felt that schools were levying just in a wild fashion where it wasn't controlled. So that's one of the reasons that was brought into the mix. So, yeah, the funding formula or the revenue limits really came in 93. So that's where, and we were a very conservative spending district at the time. And I don't know the history because that, back then of like what the timing was, maybe, and you weren't a business manager at that time.
I wasn't, but maybe we can save that for next time.
Yeah, we can talk more about that next time. So, any other questions? I should look around the back. I'm sorry to have my back turned.
This is probably an unfair question, but, when we look at the building repairs and all of that, the sum total of the amount there, that's, to do all of that sort of stuff with the limits we have now, the budget we have now, it's basically an impossible task, isn't it?
Well, what would happen, and then the main challenge we have is that, especially because we do not have any debt right now,
Yeah.
a district that has had debt long-term and has worked proactively to say, okay, we have debt falling off in 5 years. So let's say you have 5 issues of debt and you have one falling off in 5 years, and then you have one falling off in 10 and 15. A district can plan to keep that amount steady. But anything we would add to those additional levies, if we do a capital borrowing and go out to referendum and say, hey, we need money for these building projects, it would be a significant add because we don't have an amount to take. We don't have debt that's dropping off in order to make it a smaller incremental add. So if we were to add like 50 to 70 million, it would be about, I want to say the estimates were around 50 to 75 cents to add that. So 20 million was 32 cents, I believe. So if you talk about that small amount, that's a relatively small amount on your tax bill. So if we went up, what was it, went over $1 last year, if you would just have that, there would be less of an impact. But the more that you borrow, the larger that impact is. So when you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars to potentially go out to referendum for capital referenda, that would have a large impact. So right now we have that general operating levy, and then that would just be sort of layered on top of it is how I like to think about it. So the borrowing we were considering early in the summer, it would have been taken out of the general levy, which would have had to work within that with our general operations. So, and once you take out that borrowing, you are obligated to it for the life of the borrowing.
Well, the interest rates are pretty high now, too. Yeah.
Yes, around 4-5%. Yeah. Well, I hope you found it beneficial. Please provide your feedback, and if you have any other questions, please feel free to come on. Thank you for attending.
Yeah. I can't say that.
What